review these. They have a certain right to enforce their own criminal laws. But we believe that based on the facts and the treatment of other cases, similar cases, that this punishment is extreme, and we hope very much that somehow it will be reconsidered.
Live from Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Mike Kinsley. On the right, Pat Buchanan. Tonight, crime and punishment. In the Crossfire, Henry Hudson, former United States Attorney, and Jerry Miller, president and founder of the National Center on Institutions and Alternatives.
Good evening and welcome to Crossfire. In Singapore, 18-year-old Michael Fay, an American, faces 6 lashes with a rattan cane for vandalizing cars and stealing street signs. The caning, to be done by a martial arts expert, is said to involve the breaking of the skin, profuse bleeding, and permanent scarring. Mr. Clinton has protested. So have human rights groups. But Singapore says it does not want to become a second New York and has a sovereign right to enforce its laws, which it claims to do fairly and justly. Now, is caning barbaric? Is it torture? Is it an excessive punishment for vandalism? Or is it time we Americans tried corporal punishment to clean up our own crime-ridden cities? These are a few of the questions on tonight's Crossfire, where we will take your calls. Juan Williams is sitting in for Michael Kinsley. Jerry Miller, if Singapore took over the criminal justice system in Washington, D.C., would we not be living in a safer, cleaner, more secure city within 6 months?
I think if they took it over with everything that comes with Singapore, like being arrested for chewing gum and having kind of a benevolent dictatorship, I'm not sure how benevolent it is. This particular crime, incidentally, of vandalism and caning for vandalism, as you may or may not know, came to be around a political issue. It had to do with political opponents of the regime writing graffiti on the walls.
Jerry Miller, look, caning was introduced originally into the Malay Peninsula in Singapore by our British cousins.
That's true. The British are great proponents of caning.
I'm asking you a question.
Yeah.
We live in a dangerous, dirty city where kids are shot up in classrooms. Would it not be a safer, cleaner, more secure city in Washington, D.C. if we handed simply the criminal justice system over to the folks who run Singapore?
Well, I doubt it. I had the same question posed to me the other night by someone from Saudi Arabia. Wouldn't it be better if we cut off arms and legs or hands and feet? I guess if we executed every first-time offender on the spot, we'd get somewhere.
You tell me, Jerry, why a multi-ethnic city like Singapore, 2 million people, small area, is clean, safe, and secure, and this, the capital of the West, is dangerous and the murder capital of the West.
It's an odd sort of dichotomy, because in fact there are very democratic societies that are very peaceful, that don't have the problems we have and are nothing like Singapore. If we want to look to models, let's look to the Netherlands or to Denmark or to Sweden or to Norway. We don't need to look to Singapore.
Henry Hudson, you're on a panel in Virginia looking at sentencing and parole issues, and you want it considered corporal punishment as a possibility here in the United States.
I believe in appropriate cases, Juan, corporal punishment might be appropriate. You know, there's people in America today are getting tired of crime. They're tired of the conditions on the streets in America. We know that our correctional system today, as it's currently structured, has just not been effective. I think it's time for some of those people that are just plain mean, Juan, to get a stronger dose of punishment. I don't think in the case we have here of this young man that vandalized cars, I certainly wouldn't impose caning, but there are appropriate cases for it.
Now, let me get this straight, Henry Hudson. You're saying that Singapore should be a paradigm for what we do here in the United States. So if you don't flush a public toilet, you're fine. If you cross the street illegally jaywalking, put you in jail. If you chew gum, it's illegal, put you in jail. Is that what you're saying, Henry Hudson?
I don't know that necessarily follows, Juan. We're talking about caning people under circumstances where they're violent offenders. I said that I don't agree in the Fay case that caning is appropriate for graffiti. But I do think in some of the cases in America today where we have people that perpetrate one violent crime after the next, caning would be appropriate.
So you would throw out the Constitution. Here you are, a Virginian. You would just say, forget Mr. Jefferson. We don't need that. We'll handle prisoners or criminals as we see fit.
Let's talk about the Constitution here, all right? In Stanford versus Kentucky, which is one of the lead cases on proportionality, the test is society's view. Recent polls have shown that over 50% of the people in America agree that corporal punishment would be appropriate.
Corporal
That's
punishment.
right. People are, if you would put it to them, people would crucify Christ.
Well, wait a minute, Juan. Corporal
Democratic
punishment.
society, isn't it?
I think that the mob, if you want to talk about lynching people, if you want to talk abuse of rights, we have individual rights in this country that need to be protected.
We're not talking about lynching people here.
Juan, we did have corporal punishment for generations in this country, and it was perfectly consistent with the Constitution. Now, let me agree with Henry Hudson. I think in this case, given the severity of the punishment and as it's described, that in this case it goes too far. But let's take the case of some of these gang members who run around terrorizing people, raping little girls, robbing, looting. Is there any occasion in which you think a blistering caning like this is justified as punishment for a criminal?
You know, it may be that a spanking by a father or mother might make some sense, but by the state it generally hasn't worked, unless we're in a different kind of society. This really has little to do with law and order or anything like it. It has to do with the kitsch of the times. I don't know whether we're in the last days of the Roman Empire or the first days of the Weimar Republic in this country, but we're into this kind of kitschy pseudo-moral indignation, third-party moral indignation that the TV plays to fantastically.
Jerry, you know, the people who are protesting the caning loudest are the ones who have set up a criminal justice system. Now, like it or not, and I might disagree with aspects of it, but the Singapore criminal justice system works. The criminals are terrified, and the innocent walk. The innocent, and all right, it's a drug-free society.
I mean, your compatriot, Bill Bennett, would behead them. I guess we could do that too.
All right, let me ask you, our criminal justice system is a failure. And there's a success. Tell me why.
Because it's been run by politicians like you on throwaway lines and sound bites. It has nothing to do with research or science or what works or what doesn't. It has to do with being elected, like Mr. Hudson. If Mr. Hudson headed President Reagan's pornography commission, if someone had brought before him a picture of a teenage boy stripped down nude with his bare buttocks, with someone whipping him, he'd probably be out prosecuting him. There's a little bit more than law and order to this. It almost resembles someone's weird off-color kind of wet dream. It has nothing to do with law and order.
Mr. Miller, I've asked you, I've asked you a question, and that is why their criminal justice system makes theirs a secure, clean, safe city where criminals are terrified, and ours works the other way.
Let me tell you, Nazi Germany was crime-free, Maoist China was crime-free, Stalinist Russia is crime-free, and Singapore is crime-free.
Singapore is not Maoist China, and it's not Nazi Germany. It is not a democratic
society by any stretch.
But it is a safe,
if you want to live in that kind of society, you take with what comes with it.
Pat, you reduce the argument to a caricature. The fact is that it's not the criminal justice system that makes Singapore safe. Believe me, they have far more intact families. They take better care of their children, do a better job of educating every child than we can claim to in this country. And that has a lot to do with controlling that crime problem.
Would you not agree that their criminal justice system, whether you like it, and you obviously don't, it certainly works in making it a clean, safe, secure, free city? Let me ask you, how many New York subway cars do you think would be spray painted if they use that rattan cane?
I don't know. It depends on
the guys who did it.
It depends on who's doing the spray painting.
Well, I think nobody would do it.
I'm not so sure of that. I'm not so sure of that.
Let me cite another example, fellas. Back in the late 70s, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney, I did an investigation down in the Bahamas and worked with some of the Bahamian detectives down there, and they still have caning down there, Pat and Juan, for violent offenders. Rape, malicious wounding, things of that type. And I asked them down there, what kind of recidivism rate do you have in the Bahamas? You know the answer to it? Almost none. Almost none. I don't see how you can have a correctional system in America where there is no strong deterrent. And mere incarceration today, Juan, is just not a sufficient deterrent to crime. Look at the people that go out within hours of release and commit another violent crime.
Well, I'd like to see the studies on recidivism in the Bahamas.
We can study all we got to have some common sense, Jerry.
No, we need to have some facts. The Bahamas is not the safest place in the Western Hemisphere by any means.
I'd rather walk the streets of the Bahamas in Washington, D.C., my friend.
Maybe.
But you don't have any doubt in your mind that if we went to this kind of punishment in the United States, there would be definitely disparate treatment that you suddenly would see, for instance, you wouldn't see girls getting spanked or beaten in this way. You'd see boys, and you wouldn't see as many whites as blacks getting treated in this way, and you'd see many more people who were disabled being treated in this cruel and barbaric fashion.
Ron, I don't necessarily think that's true. However, I've got to concede that there's no system of corrections that is perfect. However, I do know we've got to capture the attention of some of these people that continue to perpetrate one violent crime after the next. Well, and I think this type of punishment would do it.
What about tougher sentencing? What about harsher sentences? Isn't that a fact? Isn't that what's being put out now? More jail?
That removes them from society, but doesn't necessarily change their attitude.
Juan, which would you prefer? A kid with 5 grams of cocaine in this town gets 5 years in prison. Would it be better to put him in that horrible environment for 5 years, or to give him 5 whips across the buttocks and tell him, don't do it again?
Pat, if you're the judge, I think you're more likely to get his hand chopped off. Look, let's take a break. When we come back, it's your turn in the Crossfire. We'll be taking your phone calls to hear your cries, either in support of whipping Michael Fay for his crimes, or in opposition to a cruel and bloody beating.
Feel that we're pawns in a much larger situation here. We just don't seem to understand exactly what's going on and why they're doing this. I'm not asking for violence. I'm asking for extreme pressure on an oppressive government, and I'm asking for my son to be returned to us.
Day 4 of the show. The magician is performing for the kids. I thought the dancers stole the show last night. I put on quite a show in aerobics this morning. I can see why Royal Caribbean has won so many awards. I can see it in John, our cabin steward, and Ted, our wine steward. Watching people with this much pride is quite a show in itself.
You've got some Royal Caribbean coming. How many of these words from the Dirty Dictionary do you know? Let's start with R. Roverflow, the dry dog food that spills out of Rover's dish. Cemetery, the bug graveyard on your windowsill. Espresso Messo, the coffee grinds you've spilled on the kitchen floor. Dustbuster, that which is lightweight, cordless, and cleans up dirt fast and easy. Dustbuster, the definition of quick cleanup.
When the ups and downs of a daily task get the best of you, reach for Tycoline. Tycoline is fast, non-aspirin pain relief without the stomach upset and without the national brand price. Tycoline, great for headaches, too.
Question number 2 in the National Health Reform Quiz. In the course of a year, how many people are without health insurance for some period of time? It may surprise you that the answer is 1 in 5. That's right, 1 in 5 of us. And that's a lot of people, more than 50 million Americans. And that's a fact.
Hello, I'm Susan Rook. At the top of the hour on Prime News, the crayons your kids color with might have more than just color in them. We'll tell you about a government recall. The Postal Service has delivered an urgent message, shape up or lose out to the competition. And we'll have a tale about a very sick pilot whale and how she was steered back to good health. These stories and much more on Prime News at the top of the hour. Crossfire returns after this.
Yes, I have a question about the GE CF6-6 jet engine. If I wanted to engage the cold water tap into the ice maker, do I first
light up an entire city block so I can design a plastic panel to withstand the impact of a
34-pound turkey? Or should I first twist the head 16 degrees counterclockwise to allow
enough light for people to see Giovanni Marchesi sing like
a large elephant stuck in a dishwasher?
GE has a simple way to answer some of our customers' toughest questions.
GE Answer Center.
One number gets you in touch with answers and information on any of GE's 250,000 products. Because like everything GE makes, whether it be a jet engine or a refrigerator, GE stands behind it.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
and 365 days a year.
So there's only one call to make the next time you have a question like,
how quickly can a spacemaker microwave?
travel from Chicago to New Orleans?
I'll be glad to help you with that.
Wonderful.
Terrific.
Thanks. Excellent.
Cool.
Question number 2 in the National Health Reform Quiz. In the course of a year, how many people are without health insurance for some period of time? It may surprise you that the answer is 1 in 5. That's right, 1 in 5 of us. And that's a lot of people, more than 50 million Americans. And that's a fact.
Tonight, country legend Glenn Campbell on a life of highs and lows, plus a man linked by a tabloid paper to RFK's murder. Hear how he fought back on Larry King Live tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Welcome back to Crossfire. Tonight we're in the middle of a stinging international argument. Should an Ohio teenager be whipped with a cane for acts of vandalism? And should America bring home some Singapore-style justice and start whipping some of its own delinquents? Our guests are Henry Hudson, a former U.S. attorney, now on a panel looking at sentencing in Virginia, and Jerry Miller, the president and founder of the National Center on Institutions and Alternatives. Pat?
Juan, let's go out to Huntington Beach, California. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. I believe this boy was done a favor. He will not do this again. In America, we have listened to the passiveness ideas for some years now, and it has not worked, in my opinion. I am a nurse, and I have the capacity to be empathetic. And I'm sorry for the boy that he might have scars. But, sir, we must turn back. We must do something to turn our country back to the where it was.
Thank you very much, Jerry Miller. This kid will never spray paint a car again, and neither will anyone else who's witnessed all this whole brouhaha who goes to Singapore. Every one of those kids, my guess is, or an awful lot of them will obey the law strictly, will they not? It deters, it works.
I don't know that it works. I doubt he'll stay in Singapore, and he'll probably spray paint cars back here if he does it anywhere.
You believe that? After that, go ahead, Henry.
Pat, I don't think there's any way in the world this young fellow is going to be involved in any criminal activity again, but I want to restate that I don't think that caning was appropriate under these facts. But certainly I concur with your observation that whatever behavioral problem he's got is corrected now.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the punishments is, though, and I think is the fact that this kid has been in a state of psychological terror for about 5 months.
No question
If
about
they're going to do something like that, it seems to me punishment should be swift and sure.
Patrick, do you think that they were going to cane President Nixon when he got in all this trouble for warding it? Do you think that would have been appropriate, Patrick?
If you're over 50 years old, you don't get caned.
Oh, is that it?
I think you would still...
Oh, I didn't know that was a standard.
Oh, yeah, you would get it, Juan. You would get it.
Thank you. Cleveland, you're on the air.
Juan, how you doing?
All right.
Pat, it never amazes me how narrow-minded the right wing could be. If I listened to the right wing say how they were all for corporal punishment and the death penalty, and the states that had the death penalty, murder has not gone down one iota.
Okay,
so what makes you think that's going to work here?
Well, my view is that it's clearly it works in Singapore. It is a safe, clean, secure city, but I do agree with Henry Hudson that in this case it's excessive. But what about, let me ask you, Jerry Miller, what about the case of these, these gang members who brutalize and rape and everything else? Would you favor corporal punishment since nothing else seems to work? They go into prisons. They consider it an occupational hazard.
Wait a second, Patrick. What is this bloodlust? What is this bloodlust you have? We put people in jails in America. We take away their freedom.
It's not the bloodlust.
We tell them that we have to educate them. We're going to try to give them a chance to rehabilitate themselves.
Juan, I want to create a city where when you walk out of CNN at night, you're not looking over both shoulders as you run to your car.
If you care about that, take care of children in America. Rebuild families.
On this for
Talk about schools that don't do anything to fulfill full human beings.
We've got to stop you from running to your car, Juan.
Oh, I've just got to comment on this. You talk about people going to jail as being punishment. You know, in America today, Juan, in a lot of areas, people have a better life in jail than they do on the street, and one of them is at Lorton.
That's a sad comment on America.
It's a sad commentary, but it's a fact.
Okay.
When I was United States Attorney, I was responsible for crimes occurring at Lorton. I got to know that institution very well. And a lot of the young people down there would rather be in Lorton. They feel like they're safer, a better quality of life than they have on the streets of Washington.
That's because they can't get a job?
Well, that may very well be.
Is that right? Maybe they can't get an education? Maybe the public schools aren't delivering for them?
Of deterring effect.
Juan, you can do good schools and try to help build families. At the same time, you can deal with the guys already out there who are the young barbarians running the cities. Let's go to Los Angeles, California. You're on the air.
Mr. Buchanan, I never thought I would agree with you, but knowing the Singapore law and having carried out the vandalism over a period of a few days, not just for one day, is it not arrogant to think just because he's an American citizen, he is above Singapore law?
Well, let me talk to that. I think there have been something like 14 individuals who have been beaten with a cane for vandalism. 12 of them were Singapore citizens. And it begins at 18, I think, is the youngest age this can happen. You know, my view is that the guy apparently has some neurological difficulties, I've read.
I understand he's been in some sort of neurological treatment.
And so this, I mean, and in this case, I mean, it's not an open and shut case, but in this one I agree with Henry, it's too much. But I mean, look, Jerry, we got to try something. And your solution, would it not be to, you would let out many of the people in prison now, you would open the prison gates and let them out, wouldn't you?
I would reserve prisons for violent, predatory people who are not the majority going into prison.
We've got 1 million people in prison. How many would you let out? How many would you let out?
Out of state prisons, at least 30% could be another option. If, I wouldn't let them out, if we spent the amount of money on options that we spend to incarcerate them. But we aren't willing to do
Henry
that.
Hudson, let me just ask you a little differently.
Okay.
Why don't we take this into the elementary schools and go back to paddling children? Do you think that would work? That'll stop it before they get to this point, won't it?
I think a modicum of paddling in the elementary schools might be appropriate. You know something, Juan, I bet most of the teachers in America would agree with you.
No, they would not. In fact, they would say it's wrong. Social workers would say it's wrong. It leads to child abuse. Come on, Henry. You know it's wrong to beat children. I can't believe that you would get on
we're not talking about beating children. We're talking about paddling children.
In school.
We're talking about a scolding paddling. That's right, because the ostracism that they get from their classmates is an important part of the deterring factor.
And it also leads to abuse, as we well know in this American society.
I don't know how you conclude that, Juan, with all due respect, my friend.
Look, I think pediatricians, I think doctors, I think they all say this is wrong.
Well, you're going to have to produce some
All right, let me go to...
You against spanking?
Against spanking. No, spanking is all right, but when we talk about paddling and abusive behavior, which too often is exactly what it leads to, then it's out of control, Patrick. Alexandria, Virginia, you're on the air.
Sir, I believe nowadays America is becoming one of the most dangerous countries in the world. Crime is out of control in our streets, in our cities, and it's very, very dangerous country to live. So if something drastic, including the corporal punishment, is not done, how do you solve this explosive problem of crime?
All right, let me both to you and to Jerry Miller. How do you deal? We know what we'd like to get for families, bringing them together when they're little kids. How do you deal with the barbarians who are ruling our cities now?
Well, I don't know such barbarians. I know of some dangerous people that need to be locked up, but the majority of people who are in trouble are not barbarians or anything like it. The simple answer to your question, Pat, is I would treat the average offender the way you would insist upon treating your son or brother were they in trouble. You treat them with respect, with caution. You wouldn't want them to repeat the crime, but you wouldn't talk about this
Henry,
nonsense.
what is a single reform you would advocate to deal with the criminals that do rule the roost in sections of Juan's town and my hometown?
Well, I have a little different theory of corrections, Pat. You touched on it earlier. I think it's about time that corrections in America become more short-term rather than housing people for a longer period of time. But I think we ought to put the prisoners back to work. It's time to get back and work on the roads. It's time to get out and do some hard labor.
So you're opposed to longer sentences. You're opposed to building more jails.
Essentially, except for those people who are violent criminals that have to be removed from the street for long periods of time because they pose a danger,
well, then on that
I would much rather see a shorter period of incarceration and it'd make it much tougher. Let's get them out there working rather than lounging in their cells all day, watching TV.
Well, watching TV. It seems to me that if you take people...
watch TV all day, Juan.
Well, look, Patrick, when you were a young fellow running the streets of Washington, one of the barbarians that we feared, as I recall, would you have rather that the police whip you on the spot?
Then a year in Lorton, you bet it. You bet, brother.
Then a year in Lorton.
You bet. In
a
second.
Yeah, well, I think your parents might have had a different angle on that one.
I hope they wouldn't have sent me to Lorton. Jerry Miller, thanks very much. Henry Hudson, it's a pleasure, always a pleasure.
Good to see you.
I'll be back. We'll be back and give Juan a little whooping here when we come back.
Question number 2 in the National Health Reform Quiz. In the course of a year, how many people are without health insurance for some period of time? It may surprise you that the answer is 1 in 5. That's right, 1 in 5 of us. And that's a lot of people, more than 50 million Americans. And that's a fact.
Good morning, doctors.
Good morning.
We made an interesting find yesterday.
Video conferencing from GTE lets an archaeologist present moving images, text, even himself,
What do you think?
to an anthropologist
Let me get a closer look.
1,000 miles away,
Any ideas?
and a historian across the country.
Great. We'll meet again tomorrow.
Video conferencing from GTE brings people and information together instantly. Another way. It's amazing what we can do together.
To truly appreciate Lincoln Mark 8's premium sound system, just crank it up. Lincoln Mark 8, the luxury coupe with a 32-valve, 280 horsepower sound system. Drive everything else first.
This summer, the world is coming to America. With just one goal, to take home the cup. World Soccer Weekly kicks off this Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern on CNN.
Spare the rod and spoil the child, Juan. That's what's happened to a lot of these kids, in addition to them not having parents. One of the reasons a father in the home would have been a good advantage is because they'd have straightened these kids out when they're 4 or 5 years old, so they wouldn't be dealing drugs when they're 15 and 16.
Pat, you know, the reality is this is a prep school kid from a very affluent family with a father and a mother in the home who's out doing a prank. And the idea that you would give any support to the excessive, torturous type of treatment, lashes, putting him on some kind of rack and making him bleed and making him lose consciousness. Patrick, I think that even you must think this is too much.
I thought this was excessive for this particular act, but I'll tell you, as a kid, a belt was used on my bare bottom, a big leather belt, and I don't think it did all that much damage, and maybe it kept you out of trouble later on. And if this kid had had a belt used on him when he was younger, he wouldn't be facing that rattan cane today.
Patrick, I think there are a lot of people who'd like to use a belt on you today. But I got to tell you something, it's illegal, and lucky for you. It's not right. It's not right. And you go around and saying, well, listen, there's some barbarians. You make them out as if they're monsters walking the street, and we have to have them whipped at every moment. It invites an ancient society onto us. It invites some kind of horrible rule.
You better wake up. We are living in an ancient, uncivilized society where kids in high school are shot to death because they bump into somebody in a line, and cops are being beaten up in the halls of Roosevelt High School.
That's because we are not taking time to educate and civilize those children, and beating them is not going to do it. From the left, I'm Juan Williams. Good night from Crossfire.
Little punishment is part of civilization, Juan. From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire. Prime News is next. Here's Gene Meserve to fill us in on what's coming up. Gene?
Thanks, Pat. Ahead on Prime News, all the day's top stories, including Teamster Union members gear up to walk off their jobs. We'll have the details. And from Chicago, a strong message is delivered to the U.S. Postal Service. We'll have these stories and more coming up on Prime News.
Coming up, Prime News, followed by Larry King Live after a word from your local cable system here on CNN.
You give a friend a haircut and your friend doesn't like the results. Do you know she can sue you? It's happened. And suppose you sell your house to someone who claims it's haunted. Do you know they can sue you? These junk lawsuits have happened. More and more when people get hurt, they hire a certain kind of plaintiff lawyer who looks for someone to sue, maybe sue you. Call Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse at 267-2381 and get a free action kit. Stop lawsuit abuse. Call 267-2381.
If you're one of those who wait for good things to happen, this is your week, Thomasville Week, and it's...
If we want to look to models, let's look to the Netherlands or to Denmark or to Sweden or to Norway. We don't need to look to Singapore.
Henry Hudson, you're on a panel in Virginia looking at sentencing and parole issues, and you want it considered corporal punishment as a possibility here in the United States.
I believe in appropriate cases, Juan, corporal punishment might be appropriate. You know, there's people in America today are getting tired of crime. They're tired of the conditions on the streets in America. We know that our correctional system today, as it's currently structured, has just not been effective. I think it's time for some of those people that are just plain mean, Juan, to get a stronger dose of punishment. I don't think in the case we have here of this young man that vandalized cars, I certainly wouldn't impose caning, but there are appropriate cases for it.
Now, let me get this straight, Henry Hudson.
Juan Williams is sitting in for Michael Kinsley. Jerry Miller, if Singapore took over the criminal justice system in Washington, D.C., would we not be living in a safer, cleaner, more secure city within 6 months?
I think if they took it over with everything that comes with Singapore, like being arrested for chewing gum and having kind of a benevolent dictatorship, I'm not sure how benevolent it is. This particular crime, incidentally, of vandalism and caning for vandalism, as you may or may not know, came to be around a political issue. It had to do with political opponents of the regime writing graffiti on the walls.
Jerry Miller, look, caning was introduced originally into the Malay Peninsula in Singapore by our British cousins.
That's true. The British are great proponents of caning.
I'm asking you a question.
Yeah.
We live in a dangerous, dirty city where kids are shut up in classrooms. Would it not be a safer, cleaner, more secure city in Washington, D.C. if we handed simply the criminal justice system over to the folks who run Singapore?
Well, I doubt it. I had the same question posed to me the other night by someone from Saudi Arabia. Wouldn't it be better if we cut off arms and legs or hands and feet? I guess if we executed every first-time offender on the spot, we'd get somewhere.
You tell me, Jerry, why a multi-ethnic city like Singapore, 2 million people, small area, is clean, safe, and secure, and this, the capital of the West, is dangerous and the murder capital of the West.
It's an odd sort of dichotomy, because in fact there are very democratic societies that are very peaceful, that don't have the problems we have and are nothing like Singapore.
They have a certain right to enforce their own criminal laws, but we believe that based on the facts and the treatment of other cases, similar cases, that this punishment is extreme, and we hope very much that somehow it will be reconsidered.
Live from Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Mike Kinsley. On the right, Pat Buchanan. Tonight, crime and punishment. In the Crossfire, Henry Hudson, former United States Attorney, and Jerry Miller, president and founder of the National Center on Institutions and Alternatives.
Good evening and welcome to Crossfire. In Singapore, 18-year-old Michael Fay, an American, faces 6 lashes with a rattan cane for vandalizing cars and stealing street signs. The caning, to be done by a martial arts expert, is said to involve the breaking of the skin, profuse bleeding, and permanent scarring. Mr. Clinton has protested. So have human rights groups. But Singapore says it does not want to become a second New York and has a sovereign right to enforce its laws, which it claims to do fairly and justly. Now, is caning barbaric? Is it torture? Is it an excessive punishment for vandalism? Or is it time we Americans tried corporal punishment to clean up our own crime-ridden cities? These are a few of the questions on tonight's Crossfire, where we will take your call.